Yeah.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining this presentation. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about parent mental health and coping with parent stress. A little bit about me. I'm a clinical psychologist at Kennedy Krieger. I am also the coordinator of the Adult Services Clinic in our department. I work in the Center for Child and Family Traumatic Stress. Um, and we treat kids with trauma experiences, but we also treat parents of other children that are in treatment at Kennedy Krieger. And so this is a topic that I am passionate about, that treating parents and kids that have experienced trauma and that are struggling with coping is something that I am really passionate about. I'm going to talk broadly about the mental health literature. My background is in psychological trauma. I am treating PTSD, so I know a lot more about that area, so I'll talk about it from that perspective. Just by way of my background, I came to Kennedy Krieger after treating adults and veterans with trauma and PTSD, and currently I treat both children and adults that have trauma reactions. I also treat children that have intellectual or developmental disabilities and that have experienced trauma. And so I work with a lot of families of children with a variety of learning differences and physical differences. I'm going to use the term parent caregiver, but I am really referring to all flavors and manner of caregiving systems. So that could include grandparents, foster families, adopted families, kinship placements, the whole gambit. So what we'll talk about today, I'm going to talk about the connection between child and parent stress. We'll talk about some signs that parents need their own treatment, and we'll talk about some coping and resources that are available for adults. So let's talk about the connection between child and caregiver stress. So I've been asked to speak on the role of strengthening parenting coping resources, but that relationship between parent and child is bidirectional. That is that parents and kids impact each other. That there are other potential targets, if you will, for reducing parenting stress that are just outside the scope of what I could cover in this talk. So I don't mean to say that this is an exhaustive presentation, but I just wanted to acknowledge that there are other things that we could do to help parents and families cope. Um, One of the things I'd say is that, in what I've experienced from working with families, is that parenting of kids with disabilities can be really rewarding, and parenting in general is rewarding, and it's hard. And so that children with special needs can present their own set of rewards and challenging challenges. One of the things I'll say is that there's a long-standing finding that parents of kids with special needs have a higher stress level than parents without. One of the surveys that I saw found that parents of kids with developmental disabilities, that over half of those parents report stress that falls in the clinical level. So pretty significant stress. The other thing I'll say is that parent mental health conditions are a risk factor for children's mental health and emotional development. That was a finding from the Canadian Pediatric Society. Why? Well, it's a complex picture, and it's kind of hard to study because there's a lot of variability there. So there are a variety of sources of increased parental stress that includes a range of things, which I'll touch on in the next several slides. But it can include things like children's behavior problems, sleep and feeding issues, pr social isolation, partnership conflict, and the list goes on. The other thing I'll say is that parental depression has been found to consistently be associated with a range of behavioral and mental health problems in children and adolescents. So that includes things like higher rates of depression in children, longer duration of symptoms in children, also more functional impairment, and kind of increased rates of anxiety or behavior problems. I mention those things because I think it's really important to acknowledge that parents taking care of themselves can make a huge difference in the lives of their children. So what do I hear from parents as far as like a source of parental stress? So especially with parents of children with intellectual and developmental disabilities, what I hear is that they're fierce advocates for their children's needs. But that advocacy takes a lot of energy. It comes at a cost. So some of the things that I hear from parents or some of the sources um, can include like their kids' behavior problems. Um, but it's not just that. It's kind of beyond like the behavior problems. It's beyond the sleep and feeding issues, the financial problems, the social isolation. Um, I saw a parent just last week that had adopted several children with special needs and had a large family and is feeling very isolated with limited support. Um, yeah, so and he was a stay-at-home dad that so parents have had to kind of alter their work schedule or like make a decision as a family for one of them to stay home uh, because of the needs of their children. There's also like when parents do seek services, that there's a lot of the services have long wait lists, and so they're reaching out, asking for help and being told, well, you have to wait. And that's hard. Um, I also hear from parents that about a lot of judgment, either about their kids' behavior or about their physical differences or emotional differences from other people, like feeling judged from other parents. And then there's their kids' social interactions. So things like being bullied or being excluded because of their differences. Also, I hear from parents about feeling blamed, either blaming themselves for their child's behaviors or differences, or blamed by others. That those looks in the grocery store, or at the restaurant, those judginess from other people because of their children's behavior. There are some measures of parental stress that, in addition, like that I think are that you can fill out, which we'll talk about in a second. But the other thing that I hear as far as like other sources of stress for parents. Those that we see here at Kennedy Krieger deal with a variety of other things. Kind of here in Baltimore, things like homelessness or unemployment or the community violence that can add to the picture and the complexity of what our parents are coping with. That can increase the need for parents kind of getting help for themselves. Also, the other kind of stressors that we hear about are that kind of multiple stressors, kind of the like or chronic trauma exposure or intergenerational trauma exposure can be important and kind of adding to the picture. There's also, for some of our families, experiences of racism or racial trauma that has been shown to worsen mental health conditions like PTSD or depression, and that's important to consider. So let's talk about some of these measures of parenting, of parental stress. So the parental stress index is considered a gold standard for looking at parental stress. And so let's look at some of the questions. The subscales are not my names; they're the names of the developers. Just for clarification, I did cringe at some of the wording there, so I wanted to acknowledge that. But the parental stress index is a measure for evaluating the parenting system and identifying issues that might lead to problems in the child or parent's behavior. It focuses on three main domains of stress: child characteristics, parental characteristics, and life stress. It has about 101 items. There's also a shorter form, but the long form takes about 20 minutes to complete with a few different subscales. Um, so parents of kids with disabilities endorse items that are related to the domains of that are in that difficult child subscale, but also the parental distress subscale. This was a study that was specifically with kids with autism, and these two subscales were higher, really stood out than some of the other subscales as far as like sources, like what parents are saying that they're stressed about. Let's look at some of the items, and you tell me if like any of these hit home for you. My child seems to cry or fret more often than I expect. My child's behavior is often embarrassing or stressful to me. My child does things that bother me a lot. My child is harder to take care of than most children. And in the parent distress subscale, let's look at some of those items. I feel overwhelmed. I feel overwhelmed by the responsibility of being a parent. Having a child leaves little time and flexibility in my life. I feel trapped by my responsibilities as a parent, and I feel that I'm not able to handle my child as well as I should. Heavy, heavy stuff there. There are other measures of parent stress, but I think that the parental stress index is the most widely used one. If some of those things kind of hit home for you, some of the questions, um, then stay tuned because some of the things that we talk about might be helpful to you. So why should parents get their own mental health treatment? Like that parent that I mentioned earlier, like one of the things that he struggles with is just finding the time with kind of kids with their own needs and kind of like that juggle. So it's an intentional decision to kind of get their own treatment, and it's can be a hard decision. My thinking is that like what if we can pull out um, if we could pull out the adverse impacts that parent mental health has on children, um, and and so it's like will that have a positive impact on the children if parents get their own help? There have been a few studies. You could probably imagine it's kind of hard to study that the effect of treatment on parenting and family outcomes. Um, what we find is that providing services to parents has been shown to be to enhance treatment outcomes in the children themselves. And so was a study with there have been a few studies that looked at externalizing problems, so like aggression, and also anxiety disorders and behavior problems in children with developmental delays. Uh, and it just kind of makes sense to me that, you know, what we said before, that bidirectional, that interrelated nature of caregiver and child mental health, that if we can address the clinical issues in one, it's likely to have a positive contribution to both. So addressing caregiver mental health conditions, addressing caregiver stress is one intervention that I think has positive impact on both children and caregivers. I say that because caregivers serve as a source of strength for children, and that children take cues from parents about things like how to cope with hard things. So, what are some of the signs that caregivers need their own treatment? I think it's helpful to first be aware of what we mean by stressors and potential traumas, not because one is more important than the other, but because they have different impacts. So some of the things that we know about trauma is that not all traumas are equal, that some are more likely to lead to mental health problems than the other. So let's talk about some examples of what we mean by stressors and traumatic events. Stressors were including some of the things that we touched on before, things like financial issues, relationship concerns or divorce, job loss, moving, health, parents' own health concerns, bullying in the children, hopefully adults are not being bullied still, but also like things like food insecurity and racism, which I talked about before. And then there's traumatic events, things like natural disasters or fires or car accidents, physical assault or domestic violence or interpersonal violence, assault with being assaulted with a weapon or sexual assault, combat, kidnapping, serious harm or injuries, sudden violent deaths of others, or life-threatening illnesses. And these can occur when we talk about traumas, they could be things that people experience themselves directly. They could be things that people learn about happening to someone close to them, or things that they witness happening. And so when I say that some of the things that what I said before about some of the things we know about trauma is that not all traumas are equal, that some are more likely to lead to mental health problems than others. Trauma type matters here. A systematic review of PTSD rates over time showed that when we compared different traumatic events that the authors classified as intentional, things like assault, or sexual assault or combat, they're more likely to lead to PTSD than those that are non-intentional. So things like earthquakes or car accidents, over time that those intentional are more likely to lead to PTSD. Also, the other thing we know is that trauma exposure is extremely common. Most people will experience some type of trauma at some point in their lives, but not everyone will develop PTSD. There's a natural recovery that occurs in the first 3 months, and that's very common. Most people recover from PTSD. Some will develop chronic and persistent symptoms, and also knowing that there are effective treatments for PTSD that are available, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. There are other mental health conditions that might develop or co-occur with PTSD that are important to talk about and to recognize. The next thing that I'd say is for parents is just be aware of kind of what the normative reactions are. I touched on this in the previous slide, but one systematic review looked at what happens after someone is exposed to a traumatic event. Are there some early predictors of whether someone will have a outcome like PTSD? What they found was that having some reactions is normal. That if we look in that there are some early predictors that someone will develop PTSD or significant trauma reactions. In this systematic review, what they did was they took people that were exposed to a trauma and then followed them over time and looked at all the studies that kind of had that methodology, and did a structured clinical interview by a clinician to see, does someone meet the diagnostic criteria for PTSD. And so in a variety of civilian trauma types, so not combat, that initial reaction here is important, that those with greater initial PTSD symptoms immediately after the trauma have a higher risk of chronic PTSD. So therefore might require early clinical intervention. So immediately after a trauma, if you're having a lot of symptoms, get help. Those with kind of lower level symptoms, that they might just recover naturally over time. Like I said before in the previous slide, that recovery is the normal course. That's why most people don't have PTSD. Um, so with if you're having some symptoms, maybe it's a more kind of watchful waiting approach and just continue to monitor your symptoms. Um, What we also know, as far as common trauma reactions, is that it's very common for people to have high rates of avoidance and what we call arousal reactivity symptoms. So that's things like trouble avoidance. So trying not to think about the trauma, trying to put it out of your head, avoiding certain places or situations that remind you of the trauma. The arousal reactivity symptoms includes things like feeling keyed up, worked up, on edge, difficulty sleeping, being watchful or on guard, looking out for danger. One of the earliest studies of kind of over time looked at survivors of sexual assault and kind of followed them over time. And what they found was that the majority of individuals, about 90%, had some symptoms immediately after of avoidance or trouble sleeping or feeling jumpy or easily startled. The other thing that we know is that kind of speaks to that point is what we know about active duty service members in combat is that after a traumatic combat situation, that a large number have sleep problems or nightmares, and that's a very common symptom in our service members and veterans and active duty service members. So I think it's important also to recognize that recovery is possible for most people. That in that first few weeks and months after a trauma, that those symptoms tend to fade over time for most people. Um, but we can also see things like it's very common to see things like changes in how people think about themselves or the world or other people. And that's what I mean here by changes in beliefs, like that loss of innocence, feeling like you can't trust other people, that the world is unsafe, that others want to harm me, and that you have to be ready for danger at all times. So, what are some of the signs that you might need your own treatment? Um, what I'll say is that about 30% of adults in the US report at least one mental health disorder in the last 6 months to a year. And that over half of those adults have children. So parents also struggle with mental health conditions that and large studies of the US population find that depression rates are similar in adults without children as adults with children. So parents have mental health problems too. One recent survey by CDC showed that the prevalence rates, that is the rate of depression in the general population, has been trending upward in the past 5 years during the pandemic. Um, so just be aware of kind of that those things are happening. So if you're struggling with depression, if you're struggling with kind of other mental health conditions, then maybe that's a sign that to get your own help and seek your own treatment. There's also the other concept that I think is important to recognize is compassion fatigue, which started as a term for first responders and medical professionals, but then we start as a field we started recognizing that anyone that has a primary responsibility for caring for a vulnerable person can experience compassion fatigue. Um, that chronic stress that's caused by caregiving, it can lead to diminished ability to empathize or to feel compassion for others. Um, and this is often described as the negative cost of caring for others that are in need. So let's talk about some of the things that parents can do to cope. Um, Well, I wanted to start by asking about some of the ways that you and your family have been coping. Some examples here are like things that I hear from a lot of parents are like maintaining routines like exercise or relaxation practice, or talking to your friends or your family, kind of remotely or in person, getting your own therapy or self-help groups. And I also hear some parents say, "What do you mean coping? I'm just like I'm struggling and just kind of scraping by. Nobody, I don't have the time to kind of cope for myself." Well, early on, after I'm kind of thinking about this as like a kind of discrete stressor, something kind of big happens. Like what can you do in that kind of early phase immediately after that? The first thing that I think is really important is seeking kind of high quality information to learn about like what's happened, what the trauma or the stressor, and learning about stress response, kind of like what we talked about here before, about learning about what happens immediately after a trauma. There are reliable sources for information like NIMH, the National Institute of Mental Health, and professional organizations like the American Psychological Association, Psychiatric Association, the APA, that provide information targeted at consumers and parents for high quality information about mental health. There's a lot out there. What I'm hearing from kids a lot of times are using AI as a source of kind of mental health or as a substitute for professional advice, which kind of is concerning to me. So I like to encourage people to seek information from reliable sources. The concern there is that AI can be a little bit of an echo chamber and that the information that they give is not always reliable, vetted by professionals, and so seek professional information. Also, I think it's helpful to know kind of what people should and what should be doing to cope and what behaviors to avoid. So you might hear you might hear need to hear info repeated uh, again and again, or in different ways, in different mediums of verbal, written, spoken messages, or via media, just to recognize kind of there are learning people learn in different styles, and that immediately after trauma, that trauma changes our ability to remember information. So people get more attuned to threat, and so that's why I say it might take hearing the same information a few times before it really sinks in. Also recognize that your response is normal, like we talked about. That's why I think that message about knowing what our normal stress reactions are is so important. And because that it really instills that expectation of recovery and instills hope to know that most people experience some trauma symptoms, and that most people recover after a traumatic event. The other thing I'd say is what we can learn from one of the interventions that is evidence-informed psychological first aid. This was an intervention that was developed for people immediately after a crisis. And so we can definitely pull some things out from there. One thing that I'll say is to monitor your symptoms, and I'll give you some resources on places where you can do that. Screen for common mental health conditions like PTSD and depression, or anxiety. There's there's also the other thing I'd say is that to broaden your network of people to help you. There's a saying in DC politics that nothing is of note is ever accomplished alone. Have seen a variety of attributions for that quote, but the last place that I heard it was in a speech by the historian David McCullough, who's written things like that John Adams book. Um, Broaden your network of kind of who's on your team, who's supporting you. The other things here on the slide that I think are really important are about things like establishing a sense of safety, having kind of a safe area and safe behaviors is really important immediately after a crisis. Also, what we want to do is develop some calming skills, some ways of maintaining our body's natural rhythm, things like nutrition, sleep, rest, and exercise. So let's talk about you guys have probably seen this before, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When all else fails, I encourage parents to focus on doing what's basic, that kind of basic, the physiological needs kind of area, doing the basic things for yourself, and also monitoring what is the impact of not doing those things for yourself. What's the impact on your stress level? What's the impact on your ability to care for others? Are you getting enough to eat? Are you getting a balanced meal? Or just eating whatever junk is around? Living on crackers and chips. Um, are you hydrating? I say hydrating because even mild dehydration can negatively impact your cognition, your ability to problem solve. It can negatively impact your mood and your stress response. And no, you don't need a sports drink despite what the advertising says. Water works just fine. Are you getting enough sleep? And I've seen it myself, like the impact of not getting enough sleep or not getting good quality sleep on my mood. And so pay attention to that for yourself. Um, that's and one of the challenges of our modern era is about limiting your device usage or doom scrolling. I talked to one of my parents about that I treat about this, getting sucked into like the bad news on social media, or allowing YouTube to kind of continue to auto feed more videos about the things that are distressing to her. So having some normal kind of or some limits on social media, set a timer for yourself, and so you don't get sucked in and kind of just like watch again and again all the bad news. So what can you do to take care of yourself? um, there's no one right way to take care of yourself. Otherwise we just tell people to do that, and like I wouldn't have a job. um, which would be fine. I'd have to like do like real things for a living, like dig ditches. But the point is that there's a variety of things that people can do to take care of themselves. And so there some of these things work better when you do them routinely, like exercise. We've probably all had that experience of deciding, all right, that's it. I've let my weight go long enough, and I'm going to really hit it hard. And you go to the gym and you work out like crazy, or go for a really long run, and then the next day you're miserable. What we know is that like doing it routinely really leads to those health benefits, that your muscles get stronger, your cardiovascular health gets better, that you're more and then the positive impacts of those things on kind of your mental health start to kick in. Even a few minutes of physical movement that elevate your heart rate every day can dramatically decrease your stress, your anxiety, and your depression. Also, some regular mindfulness practice or meditation or deep breathing, so that maintaining the moment by moment awareness of our thoughts, our feelings, our bodily sensations, in our surrounding environment can be really helpful. There are lots of different ways of doing that. I'm a big fan of just going to YouTube and like searching for different types of relaxation for adults. Some of the things that I've heard from other parents about that is that they'll put that there are videos that are kind of hours and hours long. That's different than a regular practice of mindfulness. I'm encouraging people to do like some brief mindfulness or meditation exercises, some form of relaxation that is a routine part of your day. It doesn't have to be hours and hours on end. It could be 20, 30 minutes, 10 minutes even. The other thing I'd encourage parents to do is to that many parents of children with special needs that I see are nurturers by nature, and they're eager to offer help, but at what cost? Do you say yes when you want to say no and then resent it? Do you feel that you would do something better than someone else, even though you don't want to volunteer? So work on improving your boundaries and practicing your own assertiveness. Knowing your limits is kind of the way that I put it here. Also know when to seek professional help. We've kind of gone back and forth about talking about stress management and kind of mental health here. So I think it's really helpful to know like what are some of the signs that you need professional help and know what to ask for. Seek out evidence-based treatments for your mental health conditions. So there have been like experts that look at and professional organizations that look at all the literature and say, hey, these are the best things that treat different conditions. So like for depression, there's cognitive behavioral therapy. It's one of the most studied therapies for depression and has been shown to be highly effective. Cognitive processing therapy or prolonged exposure or EMDR also is they're all highly effective for treating PTSD. And like if your kids are struggling with trauma and trauma reactions, seeking out TF-CBT or trauma-focused CBT, there are good treatments out there, and so asking your providers if they are trained in those treatments, I think can be really important. For PTSD, again, I said that I'm kind of PTSD is in trauma, psychological trauma is more of my area. What we know is that to be able to have an informed discussion about treatment options and treatment treat what treatments work best for trauma reactions. What we know is that those evidence-based treatments have the biggest impact. This is a study that looked at kind of multiple evidence-based treatments and kind of aggregated the results in a systematic review. And that you can see here that this is the effect size, that is the impact of receiving that treatment. So first line treatment for PTSD is evidence-based psychotherapy. The impact of that is much stronger than medication. So asking for evidence-based treatment for PTSD can be really powerful. It works. It works for most people with PTSD. And this is a study that similar methodology that was a meta-analysis that just looks at like all the different studies and kind of combines them and see what the impact is. That most people recover from if they receive an evidence-based treatment in 3 months compared to no treatment. So treatment works. And so that's why I encourage parents and caregivers to like seek out those evidence-based treatments that have the strongest recommendation to treat the conditions that they're struggling with. There are other treatments as well that have strong evidence base, including EMDR that I mentioned before, and also written exposure therapy that looks really exciting to me. That is a brief treatment for PTSD that has shown some promising results. So let's talk about resources. We're over in time. Um, let's talk about resources here. So some of the recommended monitoring your symptoms. So one of the things that you can do is go to Mental Health America and just search for that term. They have you can fill out screening tools or self-report measures of a variety of symptoms uh, based on kind of what you're struggling with, and it'll give you results and feedback immediately, like about your level of stress and your level of mental health conditions. And they have like measures of PTSD, depression, and anxiety. So you can fill those out and like get feedback. Also know like seek out like self-help. I think is a really good thing. So there are online support groups. So here I listed the one for NAMI Baltimore. They offer free online support groups. And I recognize the reality of going to a place and getting help can be challenging. Also, learn about treatments. Learn if you're the About Face is a public awareness campaign that talks about like treatment, people's process of getting care. And this was a VA based a public awareness campaign, but and it's focused on PTSD. So if you're struggling with PTSD, you can hear about people's process of kind of getting treatment for that, what their treatment was like, and their decision to seek care. There's also good information. These are from the VA's National Center for PTSD. That is good information for families on the PTSD. This one as well. So go to the VA's National Center for PTSD, and they have like a variety of patient focus handouts on different conditions. And that is it. And feel free to contact me if you have any questions. There's my email and my extension. So you can feel free to reach out. If you have a child that's in care at Kennedy Krieger, then you can feel free to ask your providers for a referral for their own services. That's all I had. Thank you all.